Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, the bear market blues. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com. Now, as you guys have noticed over the last several months, I have been posting a lot more bearish videos than you may have otherwise noticed that I used to post, right? I was very bullish for a long time, and people keep saying things like, they've never seen me this bearish, and even sort of poking fun, like, okay, if Ben's this bearish, this must be the bottom, and now we're gonna start going back up. And I wouldn't mind if that's the case, to be completely honest, but I have to we always have to go back to the charts, go back to the data. What is it saying? What are the charts suggesting is the path of least resistance in, over the next several months? And I think for me, when I look at the charts, and I try to do so from an unbiased perspective. It's easy for us to be biased because, I own Bitcoin. I regularly buy Bitcoin. So like I want to see it go up. I want to see the price appreciate. At the same time, there are, there continue to be a lot of concerning things in the charts, right? I mean, and one of those things is the systematic rejection of the bull market support band many times. Okay, I mean, we're talking about, this is, unless something crazy happens before the weekly close, we're talking about our fourth rejection off of the bull market support band, like our fourth in just a few months. So, I also understand that if we do come back down here, then we cannot really talk more about the idea of a lengthened cycle. Okay, like I understand that. But I mean that also sort of brings out the seriousness of the conversation as someone who would like to see the cycle go on, and as someone who has no problem with us ultimately breaking above, holding it as support, and then going on to put in a new all-time high. I also want people to remember that there is always downside risk involved, okay? And we have to understand the downside risk. Now, one thing to consider is that bull markets can make you money, but bear markets can make you rich. So if you could actually stick around for the bear market, however long it lasts, then you stand to make a lot more during the bull market. Unfortunately, if you YOLO everything, all of your dry powder into every altcoin dip, you're not going to be able to take advantage of potential future dips in the same way that you might want to. Okay, so a lot of it just requires patience and kind of recognizing where we are right now. Okay, so if we look at this from an unbiased perspective and we say, okay, if we don't own Bitcoin, which I do, but if we said if we don't own Bitcoin and we just looked at this chart for what it is, we might say things, we could easily come to say conclusions like, look, anytime that Bitcoin is getting rejected off of the bull market support band, we usually go either retest the prior low or we put in a new low. And sometimes you can see, you can put in a low and then you can put in a higher low, but it doesn't mean that you can't come back down and put in a lower low later on. We actually saw a very similar price action to that many times before, right? I mean, here we put in a low, and then we actually slightly put in a higher low after retesting the bull market support band, and then we kept basically retesting the prior low, and then ultimately the floor fell out, and we came back down to the 200-week moving average. A similar thing happened in 2014 as well. You can see that Bitcoin put in a low and then it put in a higher low before testing the bull market support band and then ultimately coming back down, to the 200-week moving average. So, I remind you, like, I know I don't make friends making these videos, like, the videos of being bullish and talking about higher prices in the short term. Obviously, those are well received. They're better received than talking about the downside risk constantly. And I know a lot of people are kind of sick and tired of hearing me talk about the downside risk, but I've been burned in these markets many times in the past, and sometimes I get things right, sometimes I get things wrong. And I mean, I did a good job over here and I got wrecked over here. And all I can do now is say, all right, well, moving forward, what are some strategies to help navigate this part of the cycle? And I think that, as I've said before, don't, I mean, it's not financial advice, right? But I don't encourage people to just bet the family farm on every altcoin dip, because all Bitcoin has to do is go put in a lower low, and then your altcoin Bitcoin valuations are going to be at worse levels than they were the last time Bitcoin was at that price or around that price. The altcoin USD valuations, therefore, would be even worse. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of altcoins right now are down below where they were the last time Bitcoin was at 38, 39K. So I think it's important to look at the chart and say, you know what, right now we're in a bear market. It doesn't mean that it can't change in a few months. Like we could see the market turn right back around. But again, right now the market remains bearish. Okay. And these systematic rejections off of the bull market support band are sort of, I mean, they're a red flag. Okay, they are a red flag. Additionally, looking at, say, like the 50-week moving average, right? The 50-week moving average. One of the things you'll notice is that any time we get weekly closes below it, it's only a matter of time historically before we go to the 200-week moving average. And that's why I made that video a week ago or so calling A Date with Destiny, right? Like, Destiny's calling, and it seems like Bitcoin has a date with Destiny at some point. I don't know exactly when it's going to occur, but it's just basing it on what history has shown us, right? Like weekly closes below have led us to the 200-week moving average, right? Weekly closes below have led us to the 200-week, even in 2020. Even right here, the weekly close below, we went to the 200-week. We actually went to the 300-week on the pandemic wick. Again, a weekly close below the 50-week. Does it lead us to the 200-week? Remember, there's also like sort of a stepping stone in here at the 100-week, which we tend to consolidate for a little bit before falling below it. And that's kind of where we are right now. And so, I understand that the trolls like to come out and say, like, Bin's being too bearish and that there's no way it's going to go down to these lower prices. I just want to remind people that we can go. It's no guarantee that we have to, There's certainly no guarantee that Bitcoin has to go back down to $20,000 or go back down to the 200-week moving average. But to say that it can't happen is ignoring what has happened in the past. I mean, it's just simply ignoring what has happened in the past. And I don't know that it makes sense to just completely ignore what we've seen happen in the past. By the way, one of the things we've noted also is when you get the cross of the 50-week and the 100-week, the actual major bottom tends to occur 2 or 3 months before that. So the cross of the 50-week and the 100-week historically means the bottom is a few weeks before. And you can see that they're starting to curl, right? I mean, like the 50-week is starting to curl back down, and eventually it's going to cross the 100-week moving average. And then at this point, are we going to just look left and say, all right, well, the cycle bottom, or at least some type of local bottom, is where they cross? There's a distinct possibility that could happen. So, there certainly are some things that I think have made a lot of sense, some things that maybe didn't make as much sense. I mean, I always speculated that we wouldn't hit 100K in 2021, and that the earliest that we could theoretically do so would be at the end of 2022. But it's more likely, I think it's a lot more likely that it wouldn't actually be out until 2023, based on, just based on the macro environment right now, and given everything that's going on in the market. I want people to sort of watch these videos with the perspective of saying, you know what, Bin's making this video not because he wants to, right? Not because I want people to assume the price has to go down to a lower price, but because I want people to try to avoid making some of the mistakes that I've made in the past. And some of those mistakes have basically just been, buying Bitcoin over and over and over again, like putting everything into the market and not leaving room for later on. By the way, I still buy Bitcoin sometimes. Like I still DCA it. I still have limit orders, but I'm not betting I'm not putting all of my money into the market right now. And in fact, I would argue, as I said a few weeks ago, then really building up some type of a cash position right now makes a lot of sense. If you can do that for a few months, just build up a cash position, I think you're going to be presented with a lot of great opportunities. But if you don't do that, then you won't be able to take advantage of it. So I want people to just, recognize that, look, we all want to see the market do well. We all want to see Bitcoin go up. And there's at any given time, it could happen, right? At any given time, Bitcoin can break back above the bull market support band and rally on higher. But at the same time, we also recognize that we are facing a decent amount of headwinds right now with the macro outlook. I mean, not only do you have the Fed fighting inflation and rolling over the balance sheet, but you also have all this uncertainty going on in the world from a geopolitical standpoint. And again, the U.S. dollar currency index continues to rally, which is not typically a good thing for Bitcoin in the short term. So, I look at the chart and I say, look, I mean, historically, once we get into this habit of being rejected off of the bull market support band, we go through a series of rejections, right? We've already had 3 or 4 of them, but you can see that we've had these things in the past as well. Sometimes we even get brief moves above it, but remember, it doesn't mean a thing if it's not held as support. So even this one is a failure. And we've seen these things happen many times, right? We go below it, we got above it, but we didn't hold it as support. And again, rejection. And then eventually you come out the other side. Right now we're at that phase, right? We're just getting rejected by it. Bitcoin's getting rejected by its bull market support band. We're consolidating around the 100-week moving average, just like we've done in the past. And I have to look at this from an unbiased perspective and say, look, guys, it could happen, right? I mean, Bitcoin could go back to the 200-week moving average, which is currently sitting at around 20K, right? It's currently sitting at just over 20K, which again, coincidentally corresponds to the fair value fit to quote unquote non-bubble data. All right. Now, I look at this and say, well, 2 things could play out, right? I mean, like 2 things. We could get back above the bull market support band and go on a crazy rally, or we could come back down here, consolidate for a little bit, and then go on a crazy rally. Those are probably the two obvious, or the more obvious scenarios I would suppose that we could talk about. But I look at this and say, I mean, is it really so bad if we have to spend a little bit more time at some of these prices before going back up? I mean, if you're just a long-term investor, I don't think it should make a huge difference. But look, I'm here to say right now that Bitcoin's chilling at around 39K. It's been between like 39K and 44K for a few weeks at this point. And I'm here to say that, of course, we all have our theories about what's going to happen. But when you're seeing these rejections one after another off of the bull market support band, when you're seeing weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, right? Like a weekly close here, and then you kind of come back up to it and fail to get back above it, just like we've seen in the past, right? Just like we've seen in the past, you have to look at this and say that this is a possibility. Right? This is a possibility. We could come back down to these levels, consolidate, and then we could be back on our merry way. And the problem is, if you fail to recognize this as a path, then you cannot take advantage of it. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I want to reiterate. If you sit here today and stubbornly say that it can't happen, and you don't prepare for a scenario where it could happen, then if it does happen, then you won't have the cash to take advantage of a dip down to these levels. Okay. Worst case scenario is that you build up a cash position and perhaps Bitcoin is able to just sort of hold the line between these 30 and 60K range, and that ultimately it doesn't come back down to these levels. And then you can still just DCA into the market, right? Or you can still just sort of slowly DCA into the market, and eventually we will trend higher. But the problem is, if you bet everything on the market right now, and then the market continues to just slowly go down and slowly go down and slowly go down, then you don't have anything left to put it in the market down here. So I just want people to recognize that I do think that Bitcoin is best modeled by logarithmic regression bands. And at any given time, no matter where we are, if we're in the bottom, I assume we're more likely to go up. If we're at the top, then I assume it's more likely to go down. If we're in the middle, I don't think there's any clear bias one way or another, and therefore you should plan for both scenarios, right? So having some Bitcoin on hand in case we go higher, but not betting the family farm on altcoins during a period when Bitcoin's just getting rejected by its bull market support band over and over and over again. Okay, so that's the point. How do you want to manage your risk? And you need to figure out what is the best way that you can manage your risk, and then just follow that strategy for months to come. I mean, if there's any consolation, if you look at things, say like the RSI, you could argue that Bitcoin has been in a bear market for a year already. Okay, so like if we, and I'm not saying that to rationalize anything. I'm just saying, but like looking at historical levels or historical RSI levels, normally when you see it get to these really overbought levels, that has marked either a market cycle peak or a local top before a fairly substantial correction. By the way, this correction in 2013 in the middle, I mean, it was like an 80% correction. It was a pretty substantial correction at the time. But the thing is this overbought area on the weekly RSI occurred in December of 2017, and then it bottomed in December of 2018. So it lasted about a year. In the same manner, in 2013, it lasted about a year, just over a year. And then again, we look at it today and say, well, how long has it lasted already from that weekly RSI top? It's already been about 60 weeks. It's already been about 60 weeks. And so I look at this and say, well, I mean, it's certainly possible that Bitcoin is getting closer to bottoming than we think it is. If we were to just draw a line across the page and say, how long has it taken us to really find a bottom after getting to these levels, you can see that it was typically only a few months away. Additionally, if you look at this chart of the 50-week moving average, you can see that once the 50-week moving average rolled over, we were only a few months away from the bottom, right? A few months away once that 50-week SMA, if I isolate the 50-week, once it rolled over to the downside, the bottom was only a few months later. Again, over here, once the 50-week started to roll over, the bottom was only like, a couple months later or so. So in the same manner, as we look at today, the 50-week has rolled over. And so, if history is any indication, then we could see some type of a bottom here over the next several months. So I want people to recognize that while it certainly is difficult talking about the downside risk and talking about being in a bear market, I think we've been pretty candid for the last several months that this is in fact a bear market. And we need to accept that, right? We need to accept that we're in a bear market right now. It doesn't mean we can't come out the other side and see Bitcoin perform well again. It's just that in the short term, Bitcoin remains bearish. And until we see some type of strength where Bitcoin's getting above its bull market support band and holding it as support, why should we assume that we can't go back down to the fair value fit to non-bubble data, like at 20K? Why should we assume that the 200-week moving average, which is also at 20K, is off the cards? The longer it takes us to get there, then the higher they'll be. I mean, so if we end up having to go back, if we ended up getting our date with Destiny, and if it doesn't happen until say September, then perhaps it would be at 25K rather than 20K or something. I think one of the things too when we think about these bear markets is that they have a way of constantly fooling you and making you think that like you need to FOMO into the market on crazy wicks like the ones we've seen. But really, until we hold the line at the bull market support band, until we hold the line, they don't mean anything, right? These pumps just don't mean anything. So still Bitcoin has quite a bit of work to do. And another thing too is, looking at these patterns can often keep us reaching for things and trying to say like, oh well, technically it's something, something else, like saying technically it's a series of higher lows. I mean, look, guys, it could play out. Maybe it is just a series of higher lows, and Ben's just being too bearish. Um, but if we do drop down here, it's not like it was not advertised, right? Like it's not like it's completely out of the question for this to occur. Again, I say that as fully understanding that if we drop back down to these levels, lengthening cycles is out of the question. You should take my candidness with that to say, look, I am still saying it is a possibility. You should not be deterministic about anything in this market. But if you're going to be deterministic about anything, it should be that Bitcoin trends up with time. Okay, so I generally assume that Bitcoin trends up with time. I should not be deterministic about anything. I take profits when the risk levels shoot up, and they mainly shot up over here, and they did not really over here because it was just sort of like a bounce back up where we put in a new all-time high, but it got sold off pretty quickly after putting in that new all-time high. There's also, I know, a lot of people that are sort of hoping for Bitcoin to rally back up to, it's like $58,000. And look, it could happen, but I don't think that is the path of least resistance, okay, at the current time. I mean, right now, how can we even talk about 58K when Bitcoin can't even get back above its bull market support band, which the 21-week EMA is all the way down at 44K. So try to have some perspective on the market right now, and recognize that this is in fact a bear market, and we've been in it for, I mean, if you don't include from the top, but if you just say from when we broke below, we've been in it for about 13 weeks or so. Okay, so right now we've been in about it for 13 weeks. So I would just say bear market's been going on for about let's say call it about 3 months at this point. If you just measure it from the bull market support band, if you measure it from say like the weekly RSI, you could argue that it's been going on for over a year, and we're potentially in some type of a flat correction or an expanded flat correction or something like that. But regardless, I want people to have some perspective on the downside risk here, and if you're waiting for some promised alt season that you think has to come, I don't think an alt season is going to come until Bitcoin is actually showing a lot of strength, right? I mean, like if Bitcoin's all the way at 40K, I don't think we're going to get an alt season in a downtrend, right? So I would I would be very careful about assuming an alt season is imminently going to occur, just because Bitcoin still remains in a downtrend. And if the argument is that you have to see an alt season after Bitcoin puts in a major high, like at 69K, I would argue the counterpoint to that is that this was actually a more significant top than this one, right? So this was a more significant top. Therefore, you could look at this as the dead cat bounce, right? Like that was the alt season. You could look at it like that, okay? I mean, I'm with you guys. I would prefer to see this thing come back up too, and maybe put on a fight over here. But if we don't consider the possibility that this was the alt season that people are waiting for over here, then there's probably some people out there that are just loading up on altcoins and betting the family farm on altcoins because they think Bitcoin's going to come back up and either put in a new high immediately or put in a lower high because it always does. The argument is that it already did that right here, right? So to assume that it has to do it a third time, it's a big assumption. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's a big assumption. All right. So look, I know no one's gonna watch this video and feel particularly great about the market, but I want to put it out there, despite the fact that I know the feelings that it would elicit, and say, look, there is some serious downside risk here, and that downside risk is that we keep getting rejected off of the bull market support bands. The 100-week SMA is just our secondary consolidation after falling below the 50-week SMA, and that ultimately Bitcoin could in fact get that date with Destiny down at the 200-week SMA, in the next few months. And so if that happens, I want people to be prepared for it. And the only way to be prepared for it is to start looking at the possibility now, or hopefully several months ago when we first presented these possibilities, given the fact that Bitcoin was showing a lot of weakness after the surge back up to a new all-time high. So if you guys like the content, make sure you give the video a thumbs up, subscribe. We have the premium list sale still going on into thecryptoverse.com, so check that out. Thank you guys for tuning in, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.